Hello, everyone. Welcome to another video on my channel here. I'm Erik Roth, Shamanic astrologer, here to talk about another upcoming astrological transit involving one of the outer planets. And this channel is dedicated to highlighting things throughout each and every year, but also commenting on some bigger ones that can last for multiple years or longer even. And sometimes reviewing the month, and particularly like in May, we had a lot of activity going on in the month of May. So I did a video about that. It won't be every month that I do that, but depending on what is happening and the time allowed, I can comment on that. But this one, we're going to talk about Jupiter, and I've done a video about Jupiter in Pisces in the past, and I commented about Jupiter in Aries in regards to the alignment that happened this year with multiple planets lining up together in the sign of Aries. Well, we're going to be moving into new territory with Jupiter starting May 16th of 2023 through May 25th of 2024, and that is Jupiter in Taurus. So all right, we're continuing on with this Planets and Signs series on my YouTube channel, Jupiter in Taurus 2023 through 2024. And I'm looking forward to sharing all the big things that are going on with this particular transit and going into various details, particularly with the description of what Jupiter is in astrology and shamanic astrology, and some of the bigger transits that particularly with Jupiter and Uranus both being in Taurus, that is something I'll be talking about as well. So what are the big highlights here? It is the year star, so I'll review that. This is something I've talked about in the Jupiter in Pisces video, along with information about, other videos scattering of 2023 in 2022 about what Jupiter's role is in shamanic astrology, and in this case, our role in our lives. The Taurus archetype, of course, that'll be a huge theme throughout this video, and current Jupiter transit of 2023 to 2024, we'll go through that, and past Jupiter and Taurus transits, and then the Jupiter and Uranus conjunction during this time as well. Also point out a couple of night sky images through the use of stellarium, what's coming up and where to see Jupiter in the sky, along with its magnitude and brightness. Okay, so Jupiter is the year star. So it was viewed by ancient Chinese astronomers as the year star, going back to at least the 4th century BCE. Jupiter was critical in creating a 12-year calendar based on the Jupiter's movement through the zodiacal constellations. But they also utilized, the ancient astronomers also utilized the equatorial constellations too. That's a whole different topic, but this was something, the planet Jupiter was, there prior to the rise of Western astrology, sort of infusing into Chinese astrology. And this is why in Chinese astrology there's sort of a kind of a merging and what they share with the various animals with each every month, and what the Chinese New Year is about. That's in a commentary and connection to the sort of the Western philosophies and zodiacal structure moving into parts of the Far East of Asia. Jupiter orbits the sun every 11.86 years and comes back to the same seasonal sign about every 11.95 years on average. So rounding up, it's once every 12 years that it completes. In some calendar years, Jupiter splits its time between two signs, such as 2021, when it spent 2.5 months in Pisces and the rest of the year in Aquarius. In 2022, it split its time between Pisces and Aries. So this is the source of this is from the Journal of American Oriental Society, issue number 78. And the topic was the beginnings of Chinese astronomy by Homer Dubs. So just as a reference to where that information came from, the year star. In shamanic astrology, Jupiter's role was up until about really the discovery of Neptune and the study of Neptune and astrology by Western astrologers. Jupiter was affiliated with both Sagittarius and Pisces, but then when Neptune was discovered and it was studied more and what impact it had on our zodiac and our personal lives, they started associating Neptune with Pisces and Jupiter more so with Sagittarius. But there is still expression of Jupiter and Pisces when it was in there as a natural fit for it. That finished up 2021 and 2022 when Jupiter was in Pisces. So we just had a recent experience with that. And then Jupiter in Sagittarius was back in 2019 when that took place. But now Jupiter's moving into Taurus. So Jupiter has qualities of expansion as just by itself. It's qualities of expansion. One's vision, quest, path, dharma, or path of enlightenment. That's Jupiter's role in the natal chart. Along with, as it transits something, like if you're in a Jupiter transit or Jupiter cycle, it's expanding whatever you're experiencing in your life, and particularly the area of that chart. Like say it's conjunct Venus or the sun, it's expanding that, it's making it bigger, it's bringing in synchronicities, allies, experiences of enthusiastic energy filtering through. Now, if you were in a big Saturn and Pluto cycle at the same time as Jupiter, for example, then those would impact, your enthusiastic energy around Jupiter's transit over whatever area of your chart that's happening. So this is just on a general level that it can bring that kind of vibe into your life. Visibility of Jupiter in the sky. This is an interesting one, and as part of my own experience with the planets and the night sky for many years, particularly since I started studying astrology and shamanic astrology back in the early 2000s. The skies played an important role in my own understanding of astrology. So in a 365-day period, Jupiter is visible most of that year, but then for about a 26-day period, it's not visible, meaning that it can be, in the glare of the sun. So when it's within 10 degrees of the sun, then it's outside that particular orb, meaning orb of visibility. Jupiter is regularly the second brightest planet we can see from Earth without any artificial aid. However, there are rare occasions when Mars can outshine Jupiter during a Mars-Sun opposition. We had a recent Mars-Sun opposition in December, but Mars at that time didn't reach bright enough. There were times such as a 2018 and a 2016 where Mars got close to roughly around the maximum brightness of Jupiter, so it kind of equaled that out. But Jupiter can get to at certain times and certain alignments when it's at its aphelion or perihelion with the sun. And if Earth is close enough, then it can get to -3 brightness. The negative numbers are the brighter numbers. The positive numbers are the ones that have they're dimmer. We're less able to see it. So we can see with the naked eye up to about a magnitude of a roughly 5, +5. And then, of course, for contrast, Venus can get up to between -4 and -5. So Jupiter doesn't quite get to the brightness of Venus, but it's typically the second brightest. And so when you see those two together in the sky, it can be pretty incredible to see those two bright planets. And it looks like there's two airplanes. If you're not like orienting yourself and knowing what's happening there, they can look like some kind of aircraft approaching. But then when they're not moving, they're just stationary, you realize, okay, they're definitely not something that is human. These are planets in our solar system here. So Jupiter is in the sign of Taurus between May 16th of 2023 and May 25th of 2024. And it will vary in this cycle, it'll vary between a -2 and a -2.9 brightness. So it's fairly average, although we're in a period now where Jupiter tends to be brighter at its point of opposition with the sun. So we tend to experience in the fall in the northern hemisphere here, this time around, it'll be at about a -2.9. And that'll, of course, be springtime in the southern hemisphere when it's at its brightest point. Okay, let's look at the sign of Taurus. What is this? Well, this is the archetype of the central receiver. It's the Taurus's essence is about savoring what the five senses feel is pleasing. What feels good with touch, sight, smell, taste, and sound is all part of what Taurus desires in its expression. Sensuality and beauty are strongly associated with Taurus, and hence it has a connection to the aesthetic art and intimacy as art as well. The shadow of this archetype is an overabundance of pleasure, of those comforts and conveniences. So it's like taking too much in. And Jupiter tends to, one of the qualities that Jupiter can bring in is sort of an abundance of whatever it's touching, whatever it's connecting to, be it the sign, or if it's in a personal transit, the planet that it might be touching, it brings in that. So there could be, certainly with this transit, a huge amount of abundance of emphasis on abundance itself, resources, pleasures, entertainment, things that feel good, that are aesthetically pleasing and connected to, us as that we receive in our lives, that feels good to the physical form, the body itself. Okay, Jupiter and Taurus. Here's a sort of a snapshot of some of what this is about. I mentioned, between May 16th of 2023 to May 25th of 2024, Jupiter is in that sign. So the last time it was in the sign of Taurus was between 2011 and 2012. And Jupiter's in this current pattern where it will stay in Taurus that whole 12 plus month period without retrograding into another sign. There are times when it does that, as it did with the last couple of years when we had it moving from Pisces to Aries and from Aquarius to Pisces. There was a transition where it would retrograde back into the previous sign. But in this case, it's going to be solidly in the sign of Taurus here. So I've also commenting on this with Jupiter and Taurus, expansion of our pleasures, comforts, and beauty in the world on a basic level. But it can also highlight where those qualities are lacking, as well as where there is an abundance or too much of it, particularly on a material level. And I'll get into more of that as we go along. So where will it be when it's in the night sky? So here is Jupiter towards the center of the screen here. You can see it just outside of the fish constellation, what astronomers still call Pisces. Again, this is a constellation, not the actual sign. So there's this moment, this 30-degree mark. Here we have this where Neptune is closing in on right now, and not far, just a couple of years away from entering the sign of Aries. That is the March equinox point, or as some call it, the vernal equinox point, where 0 degrees Aries is that marker. And here's the 30 degrees from that point is where Jupiter will be. And if you're watching this video after Jupiter moves into the sign of Aries, this is where it was when it first entered into that sign. And you can see there's some other celestial objects here. This is the early morning sky right now that we're looking at here. If we look due east and just slightly to the north, we're able to see Jupiter prior to sunrise. Jupiter's about 25-ish degrees from the sun at this point. Mercury also just barely visible. Uranus coming off of a recent Uranus Sun conjunction, and Vesta too dim to be seen at this time, and it's in its orbit, and it's too close to the Sun as well. All right, so Jupiter Taurus transit. These are some previous ones, and this is something I like to focus on when I talk about these outer planets, in particular, if there's a pattern to point out. So every 33 years, Jupiter will repeat a pattern. This is called a synodic return, and that's essentially in its relation to the Sun, where it will be, like returning back to that same place. Venus does it every 584 days. Mars does it on average every 780 days. For Jupiter, it can be every year that it comes back in the degrees to the Sun, but the actual synodic return can be 83 years. And if we go back to the examples of Venus, I mentioned 584 days, but it's really more like 8 years that it comes back. And then for Mars, it's 15 years or 17 years, depending on, because it has a more elliptical orbit. So if we look at those planets, that's what happens. With Mercury, it can be 6 or 7 years, depending on what the point of origin is from. So each planet's going to have their own synodic return. So these are the points where it's 83 years apart. For this one, the 2023 to 2024, 83 years prior to that was 1940, 1941. Uranus was in Taurus at that time as well, and then Pluto was in Leo and Saturn in Taurus. So there was a Saturn, Jupiter, Taurus, moment there during that time. And then 1857 to 1858, Uranus and Pluto were in Taurus, and Jupiter, of course. So there were 3 big planets in Taurus at that time. That's the lead up to the American Civil War there. And then in 1774, 1775, Uranus was in Taurus as well. Pluto was in Capricorn, Pluto will be retrograding back in June into the sign of Capricorn, Chiron in Aries, and then Neptune and Saturn in Virgo. So there's with all those years, 83 years apart, we've had quite a lot of correspondence between Uranus and Jupiter. And it's only because Uranus completes its orbit and then has its return back to its point every 84 years. And Uranus spends about 7 years in each sign. So this is, that period, 83 to 84 years, this is a really big Uranus-Jupiter type of event in the shamanic timeline here. So for those that are in their early 80s, or you're looking toward like your future, everyone that gets into their early to mid 80s will experience the Jupiter return. It's just a synodic return. It's the one that gets at its closest point to where it was when you were born. And then Uranus will come back within that year and match up with wherever Uranus was when you were born. And so we're experiencing this Uranus and Taurus period with Jupiter in Taurus since the 1940, 1941 period. Okay. What other times have Jupiter been in Taurus? Well, I mentioned 2011 to 2012 right here. Prior to that, 1999 to 2000, that's when it had a conjunction with Saturn. And then prior years, 88 to 89, 76 to 77, and then I've highlighted 1940 to 41. But you can see here, there are times when it splits time with Aries or it splits time with Gemini. So it's not just only just Jupiter moving in Taurus, and then it's always in Taurus for the whole entire 12 plus month period. It can times where it goes into a pattern and it moves in either splitting time with Gemini or splitting time with Aries. And actually in the 1904 to 1906, during that period, it was splitting time with Aries and Gemini. So just as the Jupiter in Pisces, it split time with Aries and split time with Aquarius. So there was that movement back and forth. That's very similar to what happened back in the early 20th century when Jupiter and Taurus split time with Aries and Gemini. Okay, so any Jupiter, big Jupiter events during its time here? Well, there is right after Jupiter moves into the sign of Taurus, it squares Pluto. And it's within 1 degree of a Jupiter-Pluto square between May 13th and the 22nd of 2023. So the square is at 00 degrees, 18 minutes of Taurus and Aquarius. So Jupiter square of Pluto will bring in that correspondence that has was commented on, if you will, relationship-wise in 2021 and 2022 by Saturn and Uranus. Saturn was in Aquarius, squaring Uranus 3 times in 2021 and almost a 4th time in 2022. So this is kind of this polarity between consciousness in the mind and innovation, and with Aquarius, and then the body, the physical senses, and our deeper connection with the physical realm and the earth. So that polarity is sort of being commented on now, this time by Jupiter and Pluto. Pluto is a transmission that deals with death and rebirth, and Jupiter is about expanding all that is. So there could be, during this period, an expansion of what Pluto is bringing in, and more of even a tension, like maybe like one arrow wants to point to expansion and creating more synchronicities and allies and having more pleasure and comfort. But at the same time, there's this relationship to ideas and consciousness and idealisms and innovation that is going through its own death rebirth struggle. So it's like, where does that meet? And that's a very unusual kind of combination. And we're seeing that polarity of those that are wanting to kind of get back to sort of a more raw connection with the physical earth, and doing more like outside of technology, outside of just trying to like connect into all the innovation, keeping up with all the technological advancements, and but they're channeling that idealisms in an entirely new way, which is kind of going back, a throwback into more ancient times, if you will, while still to some degree utilizing some benefits of the technological world. And on the other side, it's like full pleasure and entertainment of the mass media, of all the comforts, particularly in Western culture, all the comforts that you can imagine, you can order and you can be with all the time. And so this polarity between those two worlds is going through both a death rebirth and a massive expansion. That's where alchemy is essentially needing to happen, and where our ideas and our dreams and our fantasies of what we want, it's like, is it a reality? Is it something that we're trying to make manifest and act upon, or are we going to utilize it as a way of a deeper connection with the divine and with the cosmos itself? And in that correspondence, that's where there can be some greater soulful awareness and evolution on our part. But if it's only just simply acted upon the physical level, then that we could be missing out on that part of it. But both pathways are, you might say, valid in that sense, because both need to be, in my view, need to be experienced on some level, depending on the nature of those ideals and dreams. But to each their own. Like, each one of those is going to be, individuated and by on a personal level or on a collective level. So Jupiter in Taurus was retrograde period. Typically, Jupiter's retrograde for about a 4-month time. And it's just under 4 months in this, from September 4th, 2023 to December 30th. And that's from 15 degrees Taurus, 1534 Taurus to 534 Taurus when Jupiter goes direct. There is a Jupiter-Sun conjunction during this time on towards the end of the Jupiter transit, May 18th, 2024. At 2818 Taurus, there is no Jupiter-Mercury conjunction during this time, which is pretty rare. And there's only one Jupiter-Venus conjunction, and that happens on May 23rd, just 2 days before Jupiter enters Gemini at 2923 Taurus. There is no Jupiter-Mars conjunction, which is not unusual because Mars can take a few months to move through a sign. Then there's a whole section I'm going to talk about with Jupiter and Uranus, which they're conjunct at 2149 Taurus on April 20th, 2024. There is I typically don't talk about this, but it's worth noting in the Jupiter-Saturn relationship as it's building up toward a Jupiter-Saturn square. So when Jupiter moves into Gemini, there's going to be a square. Actually, I think it's 3 squares with Saturn between 2024 and 2025. So with Saturn in Pisces and Jupiter in Taurus. And that sextile point happens June 19th, 2023. So it's just sort of the one step before we get to the square. So there's nearly a second one in late January and early February of 2024. So that's like I might say an after effect, like whatever unfinished business with that sextile prior, in the June period of 2023, we get to the early 2024, there could be some leftover things around that before Jupiter moves through the rest of Taurus into Gemini and then starts to move into that square with Saturn. Okay, so here is in 2023, Jupiter does not reach its conjunction with Uranus, but that at the time that it stations retrograde, it gets to its closest point. So about 7.5 degrees between Jupiter and Uranus at that time. And then Jupiter's stationing retrograde at this point here. The moon, interesting enough, on that day is going to be conjunct Jupiter. So that's and then I think that evening or the next day on September 5th, it'll conjunct Uranus. So that September 4th to September 5th period, I think, is really important with the Jupiter-Uranus relationship here. Now, the last time these two planets came together was in 2010 to 2011, which I'm going to be talking about here shortly. Here's the conjunction of Jupiter and Uranus here on the right-hand side, about 20 degrees from the sun. So they'll be visible, Jupiter will be visible, Uranus will not be visible, but Uranus will be very, very close to Jupiter. So if you look towards you look towards Jupiter, you just know that Uranus is there. So unless, of course, if you have a binoculars or like strong binoculars or a telescope, you'll be easily able to see Uranus there. So again, that's 2149 Taurus on April 20th, 2024. Jupiter and Uranus stay within 1 degree of each other between April 15th and 26th of 2024. So there's about a 11-day period where they're together. So even though April 20th is sort of that center point, it's still the energy is still going to be pretty strong with that conjunction there. So they will be, that's the only time they're going to conjunct until we get to 2030s, 2037, 2038, and that'll happen in the sign of Cancer. So this conjunction will be visible here, just here after, let's see, this would be, yes, after sunset in the evening time. And it looks like they're really super close here on this program, but in the stellarium, it doesn't have like a perfect representation, meaning that the planets aren't quite that close. So if you were, let's say, hypothetically able to see Uranus in the sky with your naked eye, you would see that they weren't that close. They would be really close, but not as close as this image is showing. But this just points out that they're going to be very close together. That happened recently, earlier this year with Venus and Jupiter. Like it showed them like overlapping one another, Venus overlapping Jupiter, but they weren't, when I saw them in the sky, they weren't that close, relatively speaking. I mean, they were within a finger's width, essentially, extended finger's width, but not overlapping each other, not one occulting the other, so to speak. But on that day, this is really interesting because you can see here Pleiades is going to be there after sunset. We see Menkar, the star. That might not be visible. It's probably too close to the sun to see, but that's a prominent star in that area because there's not much else there below the ecliptic, as when it comes to stronger, brighter stars there. And the Ram constellation is kind of on its head here, depending, again, just depends on where you live. But from the northern hemisphere in the 40-degree range, north latitude, this is what it's going to look like. And then Perseus, which has the star Algol, which is the Medusa's head, is not too far from that in the northern constellations. And I point this out because it's one of those things, like with some of these other constellations have a more patriarchal projection upon them, particularly with Perseus and the Ram. So it's something worth noting. We could, maybe that could be something we could at some point reimagine. That's, in fact, that's probably a subject for another video, but when it comes to imaginations, it is like one of the most powerful things that many human beings can utilize to make changes in their life and to work with, sort of do a lot of inner work, but also to manifest things in our lives. And so maybe with that Perseus constellation, that could be something that they can reimagine. All right, so let's take a look at what else to talk about here. Now, this is the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction pattern. And you can see right here, I've got label number 10. So this is just in the 20th and 21st centuries. So obviously, if we did other centuries, this would be completely filled with small print of all the different conjunctions. But there's only one. Now, usually between Jupiter and Uranus, I've found, and I'm doing this research, that Jupiter and Uranus have a pattern of 3 conjunctions when they are having at least one. That means it's more rare for them to have just one instead of 3, especially in recent centuries here, 20th and 21st century. So the next time Jupiter and Uranus will be conjunct, it'll be in 2037 to 2038, between 20 and 23 degrees Cancer, and there'll be 3 of them. And it's typically between 3 and 4 degrees apart in the conjunctions. So it's never that far off between the 2 of them, meaning that if one conjunction happens at 20 of a sign, 20 degrees of a sign, it's typically going to be about within 3 or 4 degrees of that 20-degree marker, the other 2. The ones before this happened between the late degrees of Pisces, 27 Pisces to 0 degrees Aries, which is that equinox, March equinox point, 0 Aries. That was in 2010 to 2011. And what's interesting about that is in a few years, Saturn and Neptune will conjunct at that 0 Aries point as well, which is a topic for another time. But anytime outer planets get together in a conjunction or a square or an opposition, the hard aspects, those are usually very, very notable, I should say, astrologically, because they're the ones that help kind of create on a collective level, sort of evolving humanity here. So when they get in these patterns like this is a big deal. This is something worth noting and talking about. And we can see, the next time we get into Cancer, then there's in the 2050s, there's 3 in Virgo, and 2066, there's 3 in Sagittarius. And then there's another Aquarius one here in 2080, The last time that happened was back in 1977. So these are, this is a pattern that I might talk about it, like the larger scope of this pattern when we get into the early 2024, when we are approaching the Jupiter-Uranus, actual Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. I may do a video just specifically about that, but that's a much larger one. Now, these two planets do conjunct about every 13 and a half years. So it's going to be, that's 2024 to 2037-ish, to 38, that's that 13 and a half year period. All right, so just a few other things to talk about, particularly the Jupiter-Uranus. What are the qualities of this? What are the bullet points? The wild card nature of Uranus, and how does Jupiter expand it? Some of this is talked about when I was talking about various other things to do with Taurus. Last year there was a triple conjunction in Taurus between the North Node, Mars, and Uranus in the late July, early August period of 2022. And these are some of the same similar things here. I have redone this for particularly to include Jupiter in this, and retitled it a bit. But they were all conjunct between 18 and 19 degrees of Taurus. And so that conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus at 21, that's only a couple of degrees away. So there's something there in that area of Taurus that is being emphasized here between what happened in the July and August of 2022 and what's coming up here in April of 2024. So something worth noting here. So some of the qualities, taking stock of our life's conveniences. How do you yourself and how do we enjoy our lives, really savoring it, enjoying it, not just from a place of just quote happiness, but like on a physical level. Does there like it comes to our health, it comes to our feeling good in our bodies. So our physical experience with the earth and each other. Change is a constant, but also unpredictable as to exactly when it takes place. So particularly with Uranus's nature of being unpredictable, unexpected, and out of beyond our control, Jupiter will expand those qualities of Uranus. So this is being prepared for some potential change here, that significant change, not just regular change, but very significant change in the human collective here, particularly around our comforts and pleasures, conveniences, entertainment, things that where we're connected into that makes us feel good. We feel good in our body and being connected into the earth. And what beauties and pleasures and comforts would you desire in your own future, particularly within yourself, and what could you give up? I mean, these are questions that we can all ask ourselves. And for those that have some strong Taurus in their chart, particularly in the second, in the sort of the late teen degrees of Taurus into the early 20 degree range of Taurus. And this would also include Leo and Aquarius and Scorpio. So those would all be impacted by this in conjunction, square, and opposition. So that's when it has a personal impact in your life there. And then just a correspondence with Earth here. This is something I've talked about in last year with all the activity in the sign of Taurus. There's a clear transmission of our relationship to Earth itself. And as we continue on this, we find within ourselves that there's a crisis on Earth, in humanity, not just in all the stuff that we're having to deal with economically, politically, socially, health-wise, and so forth. There's like our relationship to the Earth, and do we have, what is our stewardship of it, and how can we care for it? I think that there is an environmental quality to this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, and it's a time of kind of listening to that Earth, and more than just looking at the financial bottom line, but what can we do not just to protect ourselves, but to consciously work with Gaia, and instead of being separated, but being with her in that way. It may even help us heal our centuries-long drive to separate from the primal nature, to say is bad, and that's a whole topic in itself. But particularly in the last 2,000 to 3,000 years, where there was greater and greater separation and sort of like shutting off nature and sort of pushing that aside. But now there's, in recent decades, there's definitely been a greater awakening of awareness around our relationship to Earth. And when we first saw the Earth from orbit, be it the satellites and particularly when the astronauts were up in space orbiting the Earth, and then even seeing the Earth from the moon, they got that hit. It was a moment in time where they kind of hit them, where they saw this Earth. There was no borders, there was no class or caste. We were all sitting there riding that spaceship called Earth. And it's up to us of what we can do with that. And so this is the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, and the Jupiter and Taurus transit by itself is definitely a strong commentary and correspondence with our Earth, as Taurus is a strong Earth sign. So thank you for being part of this, and like and subscribe if you would like to do that. I am a shamanic astrologer, so I do personal astrology readings, classes, events, and astrocartography. This was originally came up from Daniel Giamara's Shamanic Astrology Paradigm, and you can find out more information about me at inspiralnexus.com, or send me an email at inspiralnexus@gmail.com. And thank you all. Like and subscribe and share if you do like this, and feel free to ask me any questions astrologically, and be happy to be of response and to be of help here, be of service. Thank you all, and take care, everyone. Happy night sky watching.